Sibling Rivalry. Fight! This episode of Some Gadget Guy is brought to you by viewers like you, all the folks who share content on social media, and the incredible generosity of my patrons on patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. More info on those awesome nerds later in the video. It can be kind of tough when you get two phones at the same time. I know, first world reviewer problems, but the folks at Vivo sent over the new V40 and the V40 Pro for me to test drive and share some thoughts at the same time. So I'm going to do a bit of a comparison inside a review of both, as they share a lot of parts and they differ in some interesting ways. The mission remains: can we make a mid-ranger, camera-focused, super slim phone? And it recalls classic powerhouse mid-rangers like the LG Velvet. My main criticism of Vivo's strategy: I think they released too many phones, from the V20 era to the V30, and now I guess we're counting up by tens, I suppose? The V40 changes up the design around this camera module, now with more of a keyhole aesthetic, but it's a pretty decent bulge protruding from the otherwise sleek design. Of note, the regular V40 is also getting that Zeiss branding on the camera now, and that shows Vivo's even more confident in their mid-range offerings as solid camera competitors. Both phones have the same main camera sensor and the same ultra-wides, but the Pro includes a third 50mm equivalent lens for portraits. Both phones have the same 5500 mAh battery and the same 80-watt charging, but the Pro has a charger in the box and the V40 comes in a skinnier box. I don't love seeing that, as Vivo is using a proprietary fast charging solution, and to get the best out of the phone, you'd need to add that accessory at purchase. Both phones did come with cases and screen protectors pre-applied. We still like to see that. Both phones seem to have the same displays, as far as my eyes can detect, with the same resolution, support for high refresh, and the same listed specs for high brightness. Both are rated IP68, which is nice to see in a mid-ranger, but the last major difference comes down to the chips inside. The V40 is sporting a respectable Qualcomm Snapdragon 7 Gen 3, and the Pro moves us up to a monster Dimensity 9200 Plus. I have a breakdown on the Patreon with bar graphs on how these two perform. Once again, patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. And if you keep up with mobile chips, beyond just looking at a lazy Geekbench score, there are some surprising swings back and forth, where the Snapdragon can eke out a few small wins over the Dimensity. 12GB of RAM on both, but the V40 uses UFS 2.2 storage and the Pro uses UFS 3.1 according to the spec sheet, and I doubt many people using both of these phones side by side would ever notice the difference there. Lastly, I'm still disappointed that these more powerful mid-rangers still only use USB 2 on the bottom port, and neither supports video out through this port, because that performance is tricky to discuss. If it's a daily driver phone with a good camera, the V40 has a lot of similar bits and a lower power SoC, so with the same size battery, I got better runtime out of the V40. The Pro can do a lot more, a lot faster than the V40, and it eats that battery faster, but after a point, you kind of get stuck with it. If I could hook up a Dimensity 9200 Plus to an external display, this is compute power that would directly outpace a Chromebook. I have those tests on the Patreon too, especially when we're running Android apps or web services. I get a lot of techies telling me that desktop modes don't matter because we only get them on the most expensive phones, and those consumers can likely afford multiple computers in their home. So here's an opportunity to use a killer flagship grade SoC on a reasonably priced phone, and it's more likely this could be someone's only computer. It would be worth spending a little bit more to get that kind of performance and accessibility. Again, the LG Velvet had a desktop mode on a Snapdragon 765. Vivo, you could do something really cool here, but I digress. The performance does help the camera at the extremes though. Like the V30 I recently played with, this is a fantastic set of sensors and lenses. The V40 has roughly all the same options now. RAW support in the Pro mode, high-res JPEG support, all the new Zeiss portrait and bokeh options, and video on the front and back cameras up to 4K 30. I just want to point that out because GSM Arena has this wrong in their spec sheet. The main difference moving up to the Pro is of course getting the extra portrait sensor and moving up to 4K 60 recording on the front and rear cameras. I like shooting 4K 60, so that would be worth it for me. But I'm not sure how much the portrait lens is going to matter until you zoom a little more into your shot. At around a 50mm equivalence, the main camera sensor doing a 2x crop looks pretty good. I mean, would you be able to tell the difference between these two phones? Have you been able to tell which phone took which picture so far? It's only when we push a little further to 4x zoom and beyond that the extra sensor helps a little, because you have that starting equivalent field of view. But even with the third sensor, this is never going to be a solution for folks who want that super zoom range. It's closer and more social than that. The generational change. The Auralite feature is still here, but the LEDs are packed back into a smaller, more traditional flash on the back. Kind of liked it when we were spreading out the Auralite on the V30. Like, it was almost a small ring light. It doesn't radically change the performance, but I thought the V30 looked a little cooler. As mentioned in my setup and testing, the V40 ran slower through most tasks that I keep track of, but the battery lasted longer. Both are crazy fast at charging, where 10 to 15 minutes plugged in should top you off for a day. And it's not hard stretching either phone to 2 days of use. The V40, even a little easier, to maybe push it to 3 days. And given the differences in who we would recommend each phone to, I think that on its own can help make a purchasing decision. The V series is in a pretty good place right now as a purpose-built mid-ranger that steps up to do battle with much more expensive phones. Like, comparing the Pro against a Galaxy S24 Plus, and the Samsung will win most direct individual feature comparisons, but not always by a huge margin. It'll have DeX, which I wish the V40 Pro at least had video out, but the S24 is gonna be a bit more expensive, even on sales, where we have to believe that Vivo will likely also be found on some sales too in the regions that sell both. But the Galaxy loses pretty bad on things like battery capacity and charging speed, hilariously behind, and the camera fight can be rough for the more premium Samsung. Vivo is now putting comparable and maybe slightly better photography hardware in a mid-ranger, at least better than what Samsung is putting in a premium tier, but not ultra tier phone. When tech reviewers are holding up $1,200 plus phones and talking about the average consumers in their tech reviews, don't we primarily focus on these core elements? Sure, a few things might be a little nicer on a more expensive phone, but aren't we talking about consistent daily driver performance, great battery life, excellent charging speeds, and solid cameras for that social media shooting? That's what a mid-ranger should be. And these mid-rangers are stepping on the features we should expect from significantly more expensive phones. The Pro moniker here does demonstrate some differences between the two, more than just a higher price tag. Things to consider: I actually think the V40 is the better phone at targeting a price to consumer, though it really should have the charger in the box. The Pro builds on this idea in very specific ways that are not broadly consumer. If you play graphics intense games on your phone, you'll like the Pro better. If you shoot and edit 4K video at 60 frames per second, the Pro is gonna be your phone. It's gonna face rough competition though from something like a OnePlus, where the OnePlus might sacrifice the camera quality to improve the gaming performance. It's a crazy fight in the flagship killer arena right now, and you can get really granular on the features you care about most. More than anything though, it's been nice to see how the V series has evolved over the last 2 years and has become a really nice experience all around. Not just a cheap phone targeting a lower price, but a targeted experience at a reasonable price. Though I still feel Vivo puts out too many V series devices every year, I wish they could kind of simplify that just a bit. So, which of these would win for you? What do you care about more, the performance or the battery life? Drop me the tastiest of hot takes down below. And as mentioned earlier, I do have some performance charts coming out on both of these devices as I'm spending a bit more time just kind of following through on my gadgets. The first people who get to see the results from my performance testing are my amazing patrons at patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. Now, I appreciate everybody who gets out there and supports their favorite content creators. Maybe you're sharing content on social media to help nudge up those algorithms. But if you have the means, I hope you check out the community at patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. SomeGadgetGuy. Early access tiers, the private Discord, and they get all of my videos in 4K, but really they're just an awesome group of geeks to hang out with, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet, at SomeGadgetGuy, basically everywhere, but these days spending a lot less time on the Facebooks and the Instagrams, and definitely not on the Twitters, and maybe I'll check you out on the Flickrs and the Mastodons, but I will catch you all on the next review.